Hey there, good afternoon to you. 506 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Russ Vought will join us from the Center for Renewing America, former OMB Director under President Trump. We'll get his take on what exactly is in this big old deal between Speaker Johnson and Chuck Schumer. And we'll talk to you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Joining us right now, the Congressman representing Montana's 2nd Congressional District, Matt Rosendale. Congressman, good to have you with us. Happy New Year, sir.
Happy New Year, Vince. Good to be on with you.
Real quick, do you know who's running the Department of Defense right now? Any idea?
Oh, my gosh. I am introducing a resolution tomorrow for impeachment. I mean, this is really, really frightening. We've got two major issues that the country is facing, and that is our southern border is being invaded and this mounting $34 trillion in debt. When the Secretary of Defense is MIA, that just compounds everything else. Every threat that is presented to the country, every conflict that is going on around the world right now, this is very problematic.
So you're going to introduce articles of impeachment for Loyd Austin tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Do you have anybody who's co-signing with you?
We're going. Look, I just hit the ground. I literally, within the last 30 minutes, hit the ground here in Washington, D.C., and we're putting this together. We've got a chain of abuses that has taken place, a chain of lies that have been distributed from him to the American people. And this has got to stop.
Well, why would you pick on him? He's a secret medical issue that he hasn't disclosed to the American people, Congressman.
Look, nothing's personal with me, Vince. You know that. This is all about policy. And if you are sitting in one of the most important positions in our country's leadership chain of command, and you're lying to the American people, you need to move on.
It's amazing that we're even experiencing this, but, I keep saying that every week. All right, let's talk about something else that's amazing that we're experiencing, unfortunately, which is the collapse of our nation's borders. You were among a group of some 60 or so Republican congressmen who went to the border last week to see it firsthand. What was that experience like, and do you think it's actually going to move the ball in restoring the border?
So it's my 4th trip down, Vince. This is not my maiden voyage. I've established some relationships with CBP and with some of the law enforcement down there so that I know that I can get accurate information. We went down, a group of us, a day early, myself, 2 reps from Arizona, Biggs and Eli Crane, Bob Good, and our good friend Matt Gates from Florida. We went down, and we were actually doing ride-alongs, if you will, starting at 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday evening. Everyone else wasn't scheduled to be down until like Thursday. And we saw the people crossing the Rio Grande. These are things that we all know have been going on. Another record was hit. 302,000 illegals were encountered at the southern border. Many of these people, we don't know who they are. Everybody went down to Eagle Pass. There was 10,000 people there the week before, 10,000 illegals there the week before Congress showed up. And, of course, by the time Congress gets there with Speaker Johnson, the administration has everything sanitized, cleaned up. You can't even tell that anybody had been there. But here's the scary part. I spoke with CBP, and out of those 10,000 people, just that one group from that 1 week that came in, they had 200 people of special interest that were amongst them. These are people that they can't quite identify who they are. They can't tell which countries they've come from. They don't think that they're getting accurate information. They're concerned about what their intent is as they get into America, if they're going to try and hurt us or not. Guess what? When they redistributed those 10,000 people so that they wouldn't be there for Congress to see them, they took those 200 and redistributed them as well. And so what I continue to tell everybody is we know what the problem is. And if you truly recognize the imminent national security threat that this poses, stop talking about it. What are you willing to do in order to change it? That's what the real question should be to every member of Congress. Well, I'll tell you what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to not fund the government on January the 19th. I'm willing to make sure that we hold the administration and the Senate feet to the fire and say, we're not doing anything until our southern border is secure, because it truly is a national security threat.
It really is. Did you get any insight into whether or not the Biden administration intentionally moved those 10,000 people ahead of your arrival? Did the Border Patrol indicate?
Absolutely, they did. Yes, absolutely, they did. They intentionally moved those people out of there, and now because of the activity and the ability for the cartels to see what we're doing, when we're doing it, how we're doing it, what they do is they back off the flow of illegals going across the border for a few days as well, because guess what? They don't want all of that to be on camera with all of the members of Congress there. So they redirect some of those folks as well. The fellow who has now been brought on by Governor Abbott as their border czar, which is doing an incredibly good job as compared to certainly to our border czar, right, which is Kamala. The guy down there, his name's Banks, Mike Banks. He is the one who has put up the wire. He is the one who has put up the floating barriers in the river. He is the one who has brought in 12 different states to help him, whether it's law enforcement or National Guards, and they are pushing them. Now, the flow of traffic is still coming in. It's just redistributing it up to Arizona. It's redistributing it up to California. Those people are still going to be coming into our country. But he says, my job is to make sure they don't come into Texas, because we have been absolutely overrun with illegals over the last 3 years.
Yes, indeed. So as you talk about Texas responding to this, one of the rationales for why Texas feels entitled to do this is because they believe that under Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, they're being invaded. And of course, that is literally what's happening. You're talking millions of people, foreign nationals, pouring into the country, into places like Texas and Arizona. We're undergoing an invasion. Why, first of all, I know the answer to this, but why doesn't the Biden administration use that word at all to describe what's happening here? And can Congress at any point, declare it an invasion and say, look, there's no question that the states have the right to push back here?
We can and we must. Vince, here's the thing. When I meet with my colleagues in Congress after they went down to the border, and they all, some of them, it was their first trip down, and they talk about how terrible this is and it's a catastrophe. I mean, the law enforcement down there, they say this isn't an illegal immigration problem. What this is a slave trade problem. They're literally millions of people that are being sold into slavery because they obligate themselves financially to the cartel to get into our country, okay? And so everybody talks about how bad it is, and I make it real simple. I say, okay, what are you willing to do? I am tired of hearing that Congress has the power of the purse. If we use it, Vince, only if we use it. Because then you have to stand strong and say that we're not going to accept some kind of BS deal coming back down from the Senate. We're not going to accept some kind of watered-down BS deal coming down from the White House. We have the power of the purse string if we use it. If we don't, then we don't have any power whatsoever. And unfortunately, most of these people up here walk around like they should be carrying a purse instead of utilizing the power of the purse.
Unbelievable. So here's the thing that drives me crazy. One of them, and I know it drives you too crazy as well, Congressman Rosendale. But on fixing the border, you hear a lot of conversation on the Capitol about how much do we need to spend on this issue, or what law can we pass to get the border fixed? And I'm sitting here going, well, wait a second. It doesn't matter what you do, because the law is already that the Biden administration is supposed to enforce the border. They're supposed to stop illegal immigrants. They're supposed to deport people who are here illegally. They're not doing any of those things. So why would new laws or new money change any of it?
Oh, spot on. CBP pleads with us. Please don't send more money down here, because if Congress sends more money down here, they're going to build more soft-sided structures. They're going to bring in more CBP officers, and all they're going to do is have us processing more illegals faster. And so we will exasperate the situation. What we need to do is make sure that the Biden administration authorizes ICE to go out and conduct their raids to deport people that are here illegally, number one. Number two, we need to start making people that are trying to claim asylum status, 98% of them, which is wrongfully claiming, okay, that while they're waiting to adjudicate that claim and have a hearing, they must remain in Mexico, and that will keep them from entering into our country for 6 or 8 years, wandering around illegally, okay, without the ability to remove them because they've been allowed to enter in, and then we must secure the border security system.
Yes.
That's the wall. That's the fiber optics in the ground. That's the cameras. That's the roads that parallel that system. Those are the 3 things that we need to do.
Okay, but meanwhile, the Biden administration is pretending like, oh, Mexico can fix all of this for us by just securing their own southern border. And Mexico's president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, AMLO, has announced this week that in order to enforce his own southern border, he is asking that the United States send him $20 billion to help Mexico and Central American countries deal with the so-called root causes of migration. He also wants the United States to provide at least 10 million Hispanic migrants, that would be illegal immigrants, who have been living in the U.S. for 10 years or longer with visas, which would put them on a pathway to citizenship. So these are the demands. This sounds like a ransom demand that I'll only help you if you give me a lot of money and you let illegals stay in your country.
Yeah, I can cure that real quick, as could President Trump. You want me to tell you something? You say, you're not going to send another avocado north of the border unless you straighten things out. Guess what? They start straightening things out. You've got to play hardball. This is not, as they say, beanbag. Yeah. Okay, and when you go enter into negotiations, whether it's with a foreign country, a foreign adversary, or just over on the Senate side of the building, by golly, you've got to draw some lines in the sand, and they've got to believe that you will enforce them. And that is the problem that we have in Congress, because Chuck Schumer knows that he can roll over top of us. That's the problem that we have with the other countries. Yeah. They know that they can roll over us. And quite frankly, Vince, they know that we don't want to secure our border. They know that this administration, Mayorkas and Biden, want to create a permanent underclass within our country, whether that is people that are eventually going to become voters or if they just are perpetually dependent upon the federal government. Either way, they are winners.
Yes.
The Democrats are winners in this thing.
And they pad the numbers.
People that are coming in here illegally are the losers.
And they pad the population numbers for their own electoral strength, too. So one other piece here, and it's a super important one. I wish we had more time for it. But Congressman Rosendale, we see all these headlines that Speaker Mike Johnson and Chuck Schumer have reached a big old government funding deal, $1.6 trillion. And this was delayed for a time to allow for more negotiating, to make it so that Republicans could secure some cuts. You know, what's the end result here, and how are you grading Speaker Johnson's handling of this?
It's a crab sandwich is what it is. They made microscopic reductions in spending. We're talking about a $7 trillion spend on an annual basis, and these guys talk about $6 billion like they have really done something. We're still post-COVID spending levels. Why is it that when COVID struck and they ended up pumping another $2 trillion a year into the federal spending, why can't we reduce and go back to the pre-COVID levels? Everybody says, oh, it's so difficult to cut. No, it isn't. I ran an agency, okay, before I came to Congress, and from 2016 until 2020, I ran the Insurance Commissioner and Securities Office for the state of Montana. I cut my spending in 4 years by 23%. Not the increases, Vince. I cut the spending for the agency by 23%. And we absolutely have got to cut. These things that they're talking about are minuscule. We went along, okay, with some negotiations and some conversations early in the year, and we were supposed to get discretionary spending down to $1.471 trillion. And that is still, okay, too high. I mean, you could literally eliminate 100% of the discretionary spending. Think about this. And we would still be running somewhere at about $1.5 trillion a year of structural deficit, okay, adding that much more to the national debt annually. If we eliminated 100%, of discretionary. So you're telling me we can't cut $100 billion out of it? It is absolutely ridiculous. And that's before we even have any conversations about all the other stuff that's been left in there, so that taxpayers are being forced to pay for transgender surgeries and treatments, and taxpayers are being forced to pay for abortions, and taxpayers are being forced to line the pockets of these big corporate interests that are pushing renewable energy deals, whether that's battery-operated vehicles or solar or wind farms. The taxpayer is on the hook for all that stuff. And it's all still contained in these spending measures, and I'm not going to sign off on it, and especially considering it is still leaving our border wide open.
Big time.
That is exposing us to a national security threat.
It's also totally corrupt. Lastly, sir, I promised last time I'd ask you a question about this. I want to ask you today. Are you running for Senate in Montana? Do we have any news to share today?
We've had some really, really good meetings, not only with family, because obviously over the Christmas holiday I was able to visit with all three of my sons and my grandchildren and had some really quality time. But I also spent some time doing some additional visits around the district, and we'll be making a decision here directly. But it's overwhelming the amount of support that I have. But we still, Vince, have some really, really important things that I've got to deal with over the next 30 days when it comes to this spending and our southern border security.
All right. Congressman Matt Rosendale of Montana, perhaps a future senator. We'll talk to him as things move along. Thank you, sir. Very nice to talk to you today. All right. Good conversation with Congressman Matt Rosendale. And in case you missed the beginning of the interview, the breaking news is that he will be introducing articles of impeachment tomorrow in the United States Congress for Secretary Loyd Austin. Also, he's deeply concerned, what did he call it, a crap sandwich, with the spending agreement between House Speaker Mike Johnson and the Senate leader Chuck Schumer. We'll discuss that in more detail coming up with a budget guy, Russ Vought. He doesn't like this deal either. He'll tell us why just moments from now. Well, good afternoon to you. 5:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The headlines are that Mike Johnson and Chuck Schumer have reached some sort of government funding deal, a $1.6 trillion agreement, but some Republicans are reportedly, quote, pissed. It's the headline over at the Daily Caller. For more on this subject, I want to bring in a guy who understands budgets. It's Russ Vought, the president of the Center for Renewing America and a former Office of Management and Budget Director under President Trump. Russ, good to have you back with us, sir. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so Speaker Mike Johnson did come into office after Kevin McCarthy failed to do much cutting from the budget. How's Speaker Johnson doing?
Not well, and I think that's what most of the criticisms today have been about, is that, this is the same type of deal and arrangement that Kevin McCarthy would have put into place. And in fact, this is to the T what Speaker McCarthy agreed to with Joe Biden. And there was an opportunity really to have a much harder line of at least $100 billion less than this. And that is really the main criticism that I have with it is, okay, you come into office as the new speaker, and we're not asking you to defy gravity. We understand you have constraints, but even if you just did what we call a clean continuing resolution, and that's not my preferred form of how to do business here in the D.C. area, but if just you did that, right, if you did it for the end of the year, it would trigger across-the-board cuts that would amount to $100 billion less than this deal. And you can always get the votes to do that type of continuing resolution, because people are afraid of shutdown. And so that is really my expectation of what we could have done here, is to have $100 billion, and for all the defense hawks out there, that would have been only non-defense spending going lower. Defense spending would have been held at its current level. So you wouldn't have had a defense cut. And really, that's my view as to why he is missing a massive opportunity with what he announced yesterday.
Wait, let me see if I understand you correctly. A clean continuing resolution means we sustain the same spending would have been a better deal?
Yes, because there are caps in place. And the caps in place, because you finished the end of the year the caps go off of once there's a final appropriations. That could be a clean CR. That will trigger across-the-board spending cuts to non-defense spending levels. And so the form, in some respects, is immaterial. You could have a bunch of different bills that are final right now. There's not enough time to do that. That's why I talk about it in terms of the continuing resolution. But the benefit is you extend at the current levels, that will trigger the across-the-board cuts that would amount to $100 billion less than being proposed by Speaker Johnson.
Leave it to Washington. Leave it to Washington. They negotiate it, and we end up spending more money rather than cutting. That's
right.
Insane.
And you got Democrats who are panicking about this strategy because we had them so up against the wall. Now they are 10, 11 days before a shutdown. They are ecstatic and celebrating in the streets because they know that they got the better, once again, of the House Republican majority.
How stupid. So why all the can kicking? Why did we pass all these little short-term extensions just to come to this outcome?
Inexplicable. I mean, I think they passed these kick the cans to get through the holiday. And what does the cartel always do? They try to loosen the football. They explain to you, well, we'll have a fight in January. We found it unbelievable in November and December for precisely this reason. This is just manifesting what we believe to be the case back at the end of last year.
Is there any reason to believe that as a part of this agreement that the Biden administration will actually change any policies whatsoever with regard to our border?
No, and in fact, if you were serious about picking the border fight, and one of the things this agreement doesn't speak to is all of those policy fights. But this was written out of fear of a government shutdown. So you're now telling the Biden administration, okay, that's what we're afraid of. So they have the ability to veto anything, because if you're afraid of that, nothing's going to change over the next 10 days. This is only signaled that you have no stomach for that fight. They're going to take a hard line on anything that they feel will bind them between now and the election.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Republicans have been losing numbers, and somewhat of it intentionally. McCarthy collected his toys and went home. He resigned, and then you also have George Santos getting the boot for it's truly stupid. What a self-inflicted wound on the part of Republicans, and now they have the slimmest of margins to be able to do anything. Russ Vought.
No, this doesn't seem to happen on the Democrat side of the aisle. You have members that retire and then leave immediately, and the Santos one is just unbelievably inexplicable. I mean, that the Democrats would never do that with such a tight majority, and they've put themselves in this position. The margin is small, very small, but it's not so small that they can't do the kinds of things that we've been talking about on this call. And unfortunately, it will get harder as a result of the decisions that they've made.
So your read on the politics of this, do you get the sense that Speaker Johnson is just hoping to get past this? He's going to take his lumps from the right at the moment, but get it out of the way early enough that it's not a part of the conversation leading up to Election Day?
Yes, so he is buying into the way that leadership teams have operated, which is leverage points are not valuable to accomplish your policy objectives. Leverage points are very hard to be able to rally your troops to do anything. And that's the wrong way of thinking about it. We're not going to save our country that way, but that's the approach that he's taking. And unfortunately, it's exactly how it exactly aligns with Joe Biden's policy interests.
It's amazing. Russ, thank you very much. Russ Vought, again, the president of the Center for Renewing America, former OMB director under President Trump. Thanks for your insight today on this important issue, sir. Thank you.
My pleasure. You bet.
Again, Russ Vought. Your calls, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. So we get, isn't that amazing? I think that's the standout detail from that conversation is they could have just passed a regular old continuing resolution and it would have cut spending more than this agreement. Isn't that nuts? Ugh, it's the most Washington thing ever. They negotiated it and now it's worse. What a deal. What a deal. All right, let's check in on the phones. Calling in from Ashburn now is Steve on the issue of illegal immigration. Steve, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. Thanks for taking my call. Excellent topics on your entire show.
Thank you.
Very simply on the point of illegal immigration. Anybody who's here illegally, no matter what funds they acquire, whether it's through government assistance or from employment, under the table, over the table, or whatever, none of that money goes, quote unquote, home. It all must stay in the U.S. We need to put some mechanisms into place that the flow of money out of the country across the border to wherever in the 170 odd countries where people came from isn't allowed. That will help.
Yes.
Maybe not prevent a lot of the activity, because then that money is not the draw.
Cut off the flow and cut off the incentives to illegally come here.
Yes.
So similar to that, which is to basically cut off remittance payments for illegal immigrants, is to also cut off the ability for people to get hired unless they're actually American citizens or legally allowed to work in the United States. This is why we need nationwide E-Verify. But we have these big business interests and people who are paying off lawmakers in Washington to prevent verification of who's working where and who's exploiting an underclass of illegals that have been imported into the United States by the cartels, Steve.
Yeah, fancy that. And very simply, I have some standing in this. I'm firstborn in the country. My parents came over as legal immigrants after being in a UN refugee camp for years after escaping a Soviet-occupied country. They came over here. They had jobs. They had sponsors. Everything was all done above board. This whole under-the-table activity is just absolutely maddening to me.
Yes, and it's not actually helping people. It's exploiting them and harming people and causing tremendous damage to this country, which deserves its sovereignty and doesn't have it right now. Steve, thank you. Really appreciate.
One last point.
Yes,
this
sir.
is a national security problem.
Well, that's for sure. No question about that, too. Thank you, Steve. All smart points. Yeah, it is a big national security problem. You heard Congressman Rosendale talking moments ago when we had him here at the top of the hour, and he said, look, when they went to Eagle Pass last week, all these Republican lawmakers, there were 10,000 illegal immigrants who were being processed there. Process means being brought into the country and being distributed all around our great country. And by the time the Republican lawmakers got there, the Biden administration had moved them all, including what Congressman Rosendale said was it 200? He said 200 special interest illegals, people who were hard to identify, that they weren't sure what country they came from. They maybe didn't have the translators necessary or whatever the issues might have been. And, of course, it leads you to wonder, who's coming in? We're totally incapable of doing this vetting. Normally, if you legally immigrate to the country, there's a lot of bars you have to cross to come here. We want to make sure that you can come and add to the country. You can add to the sum total of our country, that you won't be dependent on the country, that you're not going to be a financial burden on the country, that you're not going to be committing crimes, that you don't have any history of terrorism or contacts with terrorists, right? All of the things that you would normally do to vet someone prior to welcoming them into your country. If you're going to have as liberal of an immigration policy as our country does, which we do. But with illegal immigration, there's none of that. There are no tripwires, nothing. We don't even have tripwires on the border. We have no fence. We have no wall. We have nothing. People just pouring across. And then when 60 members of Congress go there to highlight the problem, the Biden administration hides it intentionally. The Border Patrol conveyed to Congressman Rosendale, I asked him about that was intentionally done, and it was to conceal it from the cameras. They didn't want Americans to see it. And this goes back to, remember, early in the Biden administration, the Fox News guys, they fly these drones over the border. The Biden administration imposed a no-fly zone over the top of the border to prevent the Fox News drone from capturing images of foreign nationals pouring into our country by the thousands. And Fox, along with some other news outlets, I think, they fought back against that, and they were able to get the no-fly zone taken away. But the only reason to impose one was to prevent embarrassment for the Biden administration, while simultaneously atomizing the country and rushing in foreign nationals and filling all of these districts across the country with bodies, which will, of course, turn into electoral college votes and members of Congress and maybe actual votes, should an amnesty be in the offing. So, yeah, we're dealing with chaos, no question. All right, let me, on another issue now, we've got Donald Trump being booted from the ballot. You have ballot interference going on all across the country. BJ is calling in from Atlanta, Georgia, wants to talk about that. BJ, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Colonnese Show.
Hey, Vince. Enjoy your show very much.
Thank you, sir.
Just have an interesting factoid. Of course, the 14th Amendment was created to prohibit individuals that participated in the Confederacy from holding federal office. And that, of course, is what the argument is about Donald Trump being an insurrectionist. Mm-hmm. But an interesting fact is that General John B. Gordon, for which Fort Gordon in Georgia was named before it was changed, held the position of U.S. Senator after he got out of the Confederacy, and later became governor of Georgia. So the question is it a law if the law is never upheld?
This is a good question. One other piece to this that I think plays a role is that Congress passed an Amnesty Act in the late 1800s to allow former Confederates to hold elective office. So they were trying to bring the country back together. They said, well, we can't banish half the country from being able to be an elected representative, so perhaps we should see if we can't come back together. There was it was the Amnesty Act of 1872, removed most of the penalties imposed on former Confederates by the 14th Amendment. So there has been quite a bit of history here between the passage of the 14th Amendment and today. Of course, Donald Trump is not even charged with anything amounting, even approximating insurrection, and yet they're meddling with ballots right now. But BJ, you're attuned to the history here, which I don't think Trump's opponents are interested in.
Correct.
All right. Thank you, BJ. I appreciate that call on the listenership from Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, hold tight. I've got more for you. Maybe we'll get to some crazy audio, too. Love crazy audio. It's 5:50. I always have wild audio, so maybe we'll get to some of it coming up later this week. But I do have to say, one of the videos that crossed my social media feed this weekend, and also maybe crossed yours as well, was a bizarro, what should be a not safe for work video, but you know, if you see it, you start to think, like, I don't even think they need to censor this. Headline from Business Insider: shoppers in disbelief as man does a naked cannonball dive into Bass Pro Shop aquarium. And that is actually what you see in the video. A guy is wearing his birthday suit. He leaps into that. You know that giant aquarium? If you've ever been to a Bass Pro Shop, they have like all sorts of taxidermed animals around, like as if they're on the side of a mountain, bears and elk and things. And there's a big fish tank. He dove right into the aquarium, and he came up to the glass, and he pressed his whole naked body against the glass like a starfish. Like he just came in. It was bizarre looking. But here's the thing, and the reason I said they didn't have to censor it, and the reason I'm thinking this guy may regret all of this for the rest of his life, there wasn't anything visible to press up against the glass. If you see this video, you're like, oh, that poor man. What is... There's something missing in this equation. Like honestly, it's so weird. He's a 42-year-old guy. They say he was arrested in Leeds, Alabama after diving into the Bass Pro Shop aquarium naked, according to the local cops. The man crashed his car. He disrobed. He executed a daring plunge into the store's massive aquarium Thursday night. Leeds Police Chief Paul Irwin said the incident left shoppers in the town just outside of Birmingham in disbelief. Video taken by the bystanders showed the man do a cannonball and then later stand under the waterfall, reported AL.com. Irwin noted that the man spent about 5 minutes in the water before officers arrived on the scene. He exited the water to confront two cops, only to dive back into the aquarium. So he was living his best life. Anyway, he's being charged with multiple things, including public lewdness. I will say, having seen all of this now, that I think that the judge, when they find him guilty, as they will, should consider all of this time served. You know? After that video went public and you didn't even have to censor it, there was that little to cover up. I don't know. It'll be the shortest and harshest sentence she's ever imposed. I'm assuming the judge's gender. Yeah, it's a wild one. Hey, the great one is up next. Mark Levin right here on WMAL.